Okay, we are in Chapter 9 of the Master Puppeteer, Night Rovers. Yoshida was in a vile mood. His most profitable production in several years had been shut down by the police, and he had nothing ready with which to replace it. He slapped a notice on the entryway board declaring the theater indefinitely closed and roamed the courtyard and the dressing room screaming at everyone he saw. If a person was idle, he cursed heaven that he had been set upon by an infestation of lice who did nothing but fatten their foul bodies under his hair. If a person was busily engaged, he kicked the broom or sewing from his hands, and cursed heaven that he had been inflicted with a hill of ants who went scurrying about making a great appearance of business, but who obviously lacked any intelligence or goal. Jiro, who stood around stupidly after a broom had been kicked from his hand, stared at the master puppeteer and tried to figure out what was going on. Either the man was an unreasonable monster, which was what most people seemed to think, or there was something else. He could not shake the feeling that today's performance was just that, a performance. Yoshida's cruelty was as much an act of his subservience in his dealings with the police had been. So in other words, it doesn't seem like he's really mad, is what he takes it as. Yoshida met Jiro staring with a contemptuous glare, and marched into the East Wing dressing rooms, yelling to see Okada. When he came out a few minutes later, he announced to anyone in earshot that the next production would be a repeat of The Battle of Denora. He would post duties tomorrow, and he expected everyone to be ready to open Sunday. There was not so much wealth at the Hanaza that they could continue to loll about indefinitely, he said, though it was obvious that some were regarding the enforced closing as a second New Year's. That gives us exactly 1 day to prepare, complained Ueda. Don't worry, Kinji said. He's not going to have you to do feet for this play. He's known all over Osaka for the torture by Kodo scene, and he won't risk his reputation on an untried boy. Ueda pushed out his underlip in a pout. I'm not expecting him to put me on feet for Okoya. Anyhow, I'm not planning to specialize in women puppets. You'll get your chance, Ueda. Kinji jabbed the pouting mouth with his knuckles. Even the snow on Fuji gets to the sea, as Moshida would say. Moshida's not running the troupe, replied Ueda, throwing a dark look in Jiro's direction. Jiro blushed and prayed that no one could read his mind, for he knew in his heart he was more ambitious than any junior boy had a right to be. The Hanaza heard the story next morning from the fishmonger. A squad of police under an assistant magistrate had presented themselves at the gate of Morikawa, the moneylender, on the previous night and demanded that he reveal the whereabouts of Saburo. They had proof, the officer said, that the paper on which Saburo's message to the puppet theater had been written had come from Morikawa's shop. Although the moneylender protested his innocence, 2 policemen led him off kicking and weeping to jail, while the others searched the premises. Of course, when the magistrate was contacted in the morning, he knew nothing of the affair. Poor Morikawa had spent a most unhappy night with the condemned criminals and bedbugs of Osaka, only to return home and learn that the police, who had searched for evidence, had cleaned out his treasure boxes of the better part of his fortune. Only the fact that half the city owed him money, an obligation which, of course, had to be repaid before the next New Year's, prevented him from being completely bereft of fortune. Saburo had obviously put to use the police dress and credentials he and his band had taken at the Hanaza the night before. He had even managed to fool the jailers with his disguise. Now the wealthy were saying that they would never be able to trust another policeman. Yoshida stormed in while the fishmonger was still telling his tale, which brought the entertainment to a hasty end. The master puppeteer pounded up the new notice and then stalked back to his dressing room, bellowing for tea. As junior boy, it was Jiro's duty to fetch it, so it was not until later that he learned that Yoshida had put Kawada on as left-hand operator for one of the soldiers and that Kinji was to manipulate Okoya's feet. Jiro's immediate unbidden reaction was disappointment. He had nursed a tiny hope that perhaps he would be assigned to do Okoya's feet, but now he was ashamed of it. He pounded Kinji on the back a little harder than he meant to. Congratulations, Kinji. You showed Yoshida last time you could do it. Do you think that's it? All Kinji's self-confidence oozed away when confronted with some unfathomable action of his father's. Of course, he stopped kicking you, right? Not immediately. No, but as you relaxed and started working well with him, he did. Kinji was nervous, pulling at his nose. But that was a male role. I'm not as good with women. Of course you are. You never give yourself proper credit. Kinji grinned. You're beginning to sound like me. Am I? Thanks, Jiro. I'll get a doll from the storehouse and practice. Kinji started toward the storehouse with Jiro beside him. Halfway across the courtyard, Jiro hesitated. The storehouse was off limits for the boys, though Kinji often went in to borrow puppets for practice. Oh, come on, the older boy said. How can it hurt if you come inside just this once? Unlike the rest of the buildings which comprised the Hanaza, the storehouse was not built of wood. Its thick walls were a mixture of mud and plaster, which made it virtually fireproof. There was a pair of great iron doors on the west side that were fastened open so that air could pass through the iron grating of the inner sliding door into the dark interior of the building. One tiny window above the door let a splinter of light into the upper floor. Kinji reached up and took a key from the top of the doorframe and unlocked the iron grating door, sliding it open wide enough for the boys to slip in and closing it after them. There were others in the courtyard, but everyone was careful not to watch the boys surreptitious entrance. Jiro, and look for that word in your vocabulary definitions. Oh, I just ripped a page in my book. Did not mean to do that. Oh, I just ripped a page. Okay. Jiro was beginning to understand. All of the Hanaza was a play, not just what they did upon the stage, but off of it as well. Each person had a part. That was why when someone like himself didn't know the lines, he could disturb the whole drama. He had done that when he had insisted on getting the script for the new play. That was Kinji's role, and he had usurped it. He must be more careful. The last person in the world that he wanted to offend was Kinji. From the doorway, Jiro could see to his left shelves lined with puppet heads, which faded into shadowy blobs a few steps from the entrance. On the right were stage props, and hanging from the ceiling were 7 or 8 fully assembled dolls. Kinji pushed over a chest and climbed up to unfasten one of the female puppets. "It's a wonder they don't mildew in here," said Jiro. Despite the precaution of the open door, the storehouse felt clammy. "Oh, they do." Kinji shoved the doll he'd gotten down under Jiro's nose. "Don't worry, Yoshida wouldn't leave a costume of any worth in here. These old things aren't good for anything except for us to practice on. Apprentices are not supposed to notice the stink." Jiro wandered a little farther into the dark belly of the room. There was a lot of stuff in here. He says, "There's a lot of stuff in here. What's it all for?" "Who knows? Yoshida never throws anything away." Jiro's eyes were gradually adjusting to the dim light. There at the back was a staircase leading to the upper floor. "What's up there?" "The second floor." Kinji's voice was impatient. "Yes," Jiro hesitated, 1 foot at the bottom of the stair. "We're not supposed to be in here at all, you know," said Kinji. "Yes, all right." Reluctantly, Jiro followed the older boy out of the storehouse and out into the courtyard, where they stood for a moment blinking in the bright spring sunshine. He'd almost missed his line in the play again. He must be more careful. And what he means is, like, he'd almost usurped Kinji, and he's trying to do the things he's supposed to do. So that was kind of an expression there. With only 1 day to prepare, there was no time for Jiro to sit about and watch his friend practice. But as he worked with the other boys to mend and repaint the old sets, his mind was always in the dressing room with Kinji. He wanted his friend to do well. Of course, that was what he wanted more than anything in the whole world. But Kinji didn't really want to do the female roles. Kinji didn't even feel that he was good with women puppets. Whereas Jiro, he tried to stuff disloyal thoughts back deep into the darkness within himself. He did, he swore to himself, want more than anything else, more than anything in the world, for Kinji to prove to Yoshida his skill and worth as a puppeteer. There would be other times for Jiro to perform. He was the most junior of all the boys. It wouldn't be fair for Yoshida to advance him more quickly. And yet, there it was, ambition, wriggling back up to the surface like an earthworm after rain. And when at supper he asked Kinji in all sincerity, "How's it going?" and Kinji replied through clenched teeth, "Terrible," Jiro felt a tiny leap of pleasure in his traitorous bosom. He clenched his own teeth. "You can do it." But he must have sounded strange because Kinji gave him a puzzled look before he nodded his thanks for Jiro's encouragement. After supper, Kinji went to practice with Yoshida and Kawada. Jiro and the other boys were in their dressing room. Moshida had given them the excruciatingly tiresome job of ripping apart all the costumes that had been used for the Thief of the Takado. After each garment had been taken apart, the pieces were carefully washed and flattened out to dry, and then the whole thing had to be sewn together again. Jiro had had his fill of costume making and remaking when he had been at home. Now bent over this irksome task, the voice of Asako seemed to be constantly in his ear, screaming at him to be careful. "No, too late. See what you did, stupid boy. You'll ruin everything." With every tiny stitch he snipped, his nerves grew more raw until he felt like a turnip on a grater. "Oh, the devil take it," he muttered. "How can anyone see to cut these tedious little stitches at this time of night?" Wada looked over at him. "Perhaps it is the rest of us. If the rest of us applauded, you'd find the task more to your liking." "Oh, be quiet, Wada." Wada rose to his feet. "What do you mean telling me to be quiet? You can't seem to remember, Jiro, that I am your senior." "I'm sorry," Jiro mumbled. "I didn't mean to offend you." "Sit down, Wada," TG said gently. "Can't you see he's worried about Kinji?" TG jabbed his head in the direction of the theater. "In there." They all sat quietly and concentrated on the sounds coming down the hall. All they could hear was a voice chanting the scene, "Torture by Kodo." They strained to hear grunts or shouts, indications of Yoshida's anger, but there was none. The practice seemed to be going smoothly. "See, you can relax, Jiro. Kinji's doing all right." Jiro attempted a smile. TG's childlike face was so open, his own concern for Kinji so pure, so unpolluted with selfishness or ambition. Jiro nodded and jerked his head down closely over his work. He did not want TG to read his expression and find something unworthy there. "What's that?" All the boys jumped to their feet at the sound. "Stones," said Jiro. "Probably night rovers throwing stones at the building." He turned to Wada. "What should we do?" "What should we do?" Wada yelled over the shower of rocks. "How should I know? Kinji's up there near the door, and Yoshida, they're both right there. But you're senior boy here." Wada looked closely into Jiro's eyes. "Are you trying to make fun of me?" No, would you like for me to go to the door and see what's happening? The building rattled under another assault of stones. Yes, Wada said tightly. Tell them to go away. And here's some guys outside of the door. Going down the dark hall, Jiro didn't fear nearly as brave as he had in front of Wada, so he was grateful that TG followed him out of the room. From the theater, the chanting was proceeding as though nothing else mattered. I'll just open it a crack. Stay close by, TG, in case we have to slam it shut fast. Jiro lifted the bolt as quietly as he could and opened the door just enough to allow himself a one-eyed view of the alley. It was filled with people. Some of them were carrying torches. All right, once more, a voice came out of the crowd. Make him hear us this time. The mob let loose rocks, some of which struck the wooden walls with force and bounced back into the crowd. There were shouts and complaints from those who were hit. Shut up, commanded the leader's voice. All together now. Call Yoshida. Hey, someone said, the door's open. Everyone turned and began pushing toward the door. Jiro and TG slammed it shut and threw the bolt. They leaned against it, the narrow escape taking their breath like a long run. What do we do now? I don't know. You're my senior. Oh, Jiro, TG's voice came out like a laugh. Me? The night rovers were banging on the door. There were shouts of Yoshida, Yoshida. Maybe we better call Yoshida. From backstage, they could hear the chanting continuing, though it was nearly drowned out by the noise outside. The boys hesitated. Jiro swallowed. Do you want me to tell him? Oh, would you? He hates the way I stutter. Jiro moved to the curtain and stood against the wall from which he could see the scene. If any of the puppeteers noticed him, they pretended not to. None of them was wearing a hood, but Yoshida's eyes veiled the expression on his face. Jiro could not really see Kinji, for he was blocked by his puppet as he bent over on the other side of Yoshida, who, standing on foot-high clogs, towered over his assistants. The puppet, Okoya, was playing the kodo. A chill went, and that was an instrument, remember from earlier? A chill went through Jiro's body. Yoshida was really a master. All of them were. The first time he'd stood and watched this scene, he had thought it magnificent, but as a child judges something he cannot understand. Now he knew. Now his blood raced to his arm, and he could feel his own fingers and wrists moving with those of the puppeteers. Mentally, he shifted positions, from Yoshida to Mochida on the left, and then to Kinji, motionless, holding the knees of the puppet just so for the duration of the tense concert. Kinji was doing well. He could feel that from the utter trust with which Yoshida and Mochida were making their own movements. I'm glad, Jiro told himself. He deserves this. My time will come. He tried to comfort himself. The noise outside the alley door was mounting. TG was suddenly there beside him. They may knock down the door. Jiro held up his hand. He shook his head. Better the door than this scene needlessly interrupted. During the remainder of the scene, the chanting and samisen were nearly drowned out by the cries and banging from the alley. Those on stage proceeded with utter concentration. They drew Jiro into their magical circle. He would have been able utterly to dismiss the night rovers if it had not been for TG running back and forth distractedly between the stage and the alley door like a goldfish who had spied a cat on either side of his small pond. After the last note of the samisen died away, the puppeteers held their position for a few seconds and then relaxed. At that moment, TG ran out onto the stage. Master! The stuttering so overcame him that he simply nodded his head toward the alley door where there were shouts of Yoshida, and the pounding seemed to have increased in volume and ferocity since the scene ended. Who are they? Yoshida snapped. TG's body tensed. The veins on his neck protruded. No. He fought the word that would not come. Night rovers, Jiro jumped in. Yoshida turned to him. So? What do they want with me? I don't know, sir. Jiro lowered his eyes. We didn't ask. We thought we ought to speak to you first. Well, go ask them, Yoshida yelled. Jiro raced for the door with TG at his heels. TG nodded his head as if to say, You talk, you know I can't. So without opening the door, Jiro yelled at the top of his voice, Yoshida wants to know your business with him. The pounding and shouting stopped abruptly. The voice that Jiro recognized earlier as belonging to the leader replied, We want food. Tell Yoshida to give us rice and we'll go away. The boys ran back to the stage. They want rice, sir. I heard them. Yoshida was putting the miniature instruments used by the puppet into their quilted covers and giving them to Mochida and Kinji to put away. Jiro waited for him to say something more, but he didn't. Well, sir? Well, what? Yoshida turned toward Jiro impatiently. Well? Now he understood why TG stammered. Well, what do you want me to say to them? Nothing. Nothing? Nothing. Yoshida roared the word into his face. Jiro stepped backwards, nearly knocking TG to the floor. Do you think I'll let a bunch of thieving beggars bully me? They're hungry, Yoshida. Kinji spoke quietly, but there was no fear in his voice. We have enough. Why don't you give them a little? Yoshida swirled around, stamping his high clogs on the wooden floor. You sentimental little fool. What do you suppose would happen if I gave rice to a mob of hoodlums who banged upon my door? Where would they end it? The whole city, the whole country is hungry. He turned back to Jiro and TG. Get the mallets from the kitchen, the ones we beat the New Year's rice with. If anyone breaks in the door, you be here to see they don't get any farther. Kinji opened his mouth as if to speak, but Yoshida pushed Jiro aside and marched past him to his dressing room. Go to bed, Kinji. Mochida spoke for the first time. The boys here can take care of things. Kinji hesitated. Go on. You have to get on stage tomorrow. Fetch the mallets, Jiro. The two of them sat out the night in front of the door, mallets in hand. As the night wore on, Jiro grew cold and his stomach felt queasy from the lack of sleep. The night rovers kept up their disturbance, but the door was a strong one. And though there were anxious moments when it seemed that nothing could withstand the hammering and battering, the thick pine held and did not give way. By dawn, Jiro was nearly ill with listening and waiting. He hated everyone. The night rovers for taking away his sleep, Yoshida for refusing to speak to them, Kinji for having pity on brutes like these, even poor Tiji, who sat opposite him, quiet and uncomplaining. Down the hallway they could hear someone, Moshida probably, shoving open his night shutters. It must be nearly morning. Jiro stood up and nearly fell. His legs had gone to sleep under him. What a terrible night. But at least it was nearly over. The pounding had ceased, and the night rovers were talking amongst themselves. Now and again a voice would call an insult from a distance down the alley. They must be dispersing. Jiro nodded at Tiji. Tiji got up and stretched and yawned. It was nearly over. Suddenly a harsh female voice cut through the low rumble at the mouth of the alley. "Yoshida, may you spend eternity as a foot manipulator for the devil!" The curse was greeted with a chorus of raucous laughter. Jiro leaned heavily against the door. Sako. But what was she doing out there with them? Should he open the door and try to slip out to her before the night rovers saw the crack and plunged through it? Tiji was staring at him. He could no longer hear their voices now. The night rovers had all left the alley. Asako would be going home. Surely she would already be well down Dodomobori by this time. Besides, what would he do if he caught up with her? He had nothing to give her. Jiro looked down at the mallet, which had been in his hand all night. What if, suppose the night rovers had managed to break the door, might have struck her down? For a moment he thought he was going to be sick, but the nausea passed. It's morning, Tiji. Let's make the fires. It's morning, said Tiji. Let's make the fires. Yes, said Jiro. Yes, let's go. And that's the end of chapter 9 of The Master Puppeteer.